hanging your laundry in the freezing cold. Your clothes are just gonna freeze, and when you bring them in to thaw, they'll be wet again. Who does Mrs. Claus have to sleep with to get a hand press for Christmas?
How do I know so much about Santa? Well, I'm Mrs. Claus.
Why are you acting like I was the one asking questions? Just introduce yourself like a normal person, Mrs. Claus.
It was long ago, before you were living.
Assuming you know your audience's age. For all you know, I could be a baby boomer and use Facebook and say things like, "Here comes trouble," when I see my friend at Applebee's, and then gripe about how those damn millennials and their YouTubes and avocado toast are ruining everything.
Though I can't give you the very date.
Unreliable narration.
Wrapping presents in ribbons and gauze has worn me weary,
Said Santa Claus.
Yeah, we know who's talking, Mrs. C. We're right here. Stop justifying your nursery school rhyme scheme by telling us things we already know.
and a sort of kind of kink inside whenever I think of that Christmas ride.
Whoa, hold on, Santa. There's a time and place to discuss your kinks, and the beginning of a children's cartoon ain't one of them. At least, that's what a federal judge explained to me a few years back when I got this ankle monitor.
Probably never got over the case of near pneumonia you picked up last year.
How do you catch a case of near pneumonia? Does that work for other illnesses too? Can you have near yellow fever or near bronchitis? Did you get a near medical degree for these diagnoses?
Why, there'd be no Christmas.
Well, that's not exactly true, Mrs. Claus. The day would still exist. People could still celebrate with their families, go to church, eat food. The only thing they'd be missing are presents that magically appear under the tree. Hell, those polar bears could even still drink Coca-Cola without Santa.
Nobody cares about Christmas anymore.
That's not what the angry man on Fox News told me.
Warn the people. Tell the papers I'm much too tired for Christmas capers.
For someone that's this tired, Santa will sure go on to do a lot of rhyming before this is all over. Also, does Santa regularly make announcements in the newspaper? Does he write op-eds about holidays to announce his Christmas plans? If so, which ones? Or is Santa syndicated under a pseudonym? I had a suspicion about those hairy Jingle Balls articles, and now I'm sure.
Santa was taking a holiday, and the world would soon know that it was to be the year without a Santa Claus.
Roll Claus-mercials. Calendar is clear enough to let me know this story likely takes place in 1953, 1959, or 1970, but not clear enough to let me know what month it is after January. Now I'm more interested in the story of this guy who not only painted the movie title on his buggy, but a copyright year and production company.
I'm not feeling my best.
Why not just get someone else to be Santa for a year? Can't you just call up one of your replacements like Tim Allen or Bender? Why do you have to shut down the whole operation just because you don't want it this year? Let an elf be Santa, or your wife. Honestly, this decision is seeming a bit elfist and sexist the more I think about it. Mrs. Claus is singing about how the children thought Santa died and we're all sad about it right before the TV movie shows us that his resignation was big news and then spends half the runtime on the fact that none of the kids really cared.
Every eye shed a blue Christmas tear.
This tear is not blue.
Headlines screamed, wires went humming.
Wait, I'm still confused about how Santa disseminated this announcement to the press. Did he fax every newspaper a press release from his elves? And the journalists, whose job it is to ask questions, just went with the announcement without asking for proof? Whatever happened to journalistic standards? Printing the same exact Daily Tribune with two different headlines may have been possible, but it's certainly not cost-effective and might explain the disappearance of print media.
Cried the gnomes and elves.
Since when did the North Pole hire gnomes? Never once before in a Christmas story have I heard anything about gnomes. Who else works at the North Pole? Dragonborn? Tabaxi?
Will you stop that?
Trying to Three Stooge with only two Stooges.
Oh, hi, Mrs. Claus. Yes, Mrs. Claus. Oh, okay, Mrs. Claus. Sure thing, Mrs. Claus.
We will never find out the cause of all this claus.
Who would know the difference? Just Santa Claus and me.
I mean, the elves and gnomes would probably notice. Reindeer as well. And since the newspapers know Santa exists now, they'll probably have reporters stationed at every chimney they can find. But other than the worldwide global media, yeah, nobody else would know.
I admit I'm underfed, but with a pillow from the bed.
Santa's credibility is based solely on the shape of his abdomen cliche. Mrs. Claus is now singing about going down the chimney with Santa's sack. And even if that wasn't meant to be a euphemism, it's certainly one now. Mrs. Claus is now singing about only being seen from the back and presenting to the camera. I'm beginning to question if this was a song about taking up the mantle of Santa Claus or her desire to start an OnlyFans.
Well, boys, what do you think?
Writers continue to provide evidence for my previous argument.
Well, I guess we'll have to move right on then to Plan B.
That's it? You made me sit through an entire song about you're taking Santa's place and you just give up just like that? I haven't seen something this pointless since Finn and Rose took a holiday to Canto Bight. Riding a vixen ass to ass as part of Plan B. Also, why are you forcing poor Vixen to carry 2 fully grown elves? You showed us a team of reindeer earlier that clearly aren't being used. Let them take the sleigh. Mrs. Claus is a dick to reindeer.
Concern it, Ma. What's going on?
Using the phrase "concern it." Only Joe Pesci could get away with using such a ridiculous phrase in place of cursing, and he'd have to be robbing a McAllister family home first.
She's just a baby.
Earlier, Mrs. Claus said Vixen had been out in the world before, so she could just show Jingle and Jangle around. Now Santa's saying she's just a baby. We know Vixen's a regular member of the team that pulls the sleigh, so either Santa's using a baby reindeer to fly his sleigh, or she's not so young that Mrs. Claus should be in trouble for sending her out.
His devil of a brother will put the heat on him for sure.
So there are 2 brothers with ice and fire powers that regularly try to stop Santa from delivering toys, and Mrs. Claus sent a couple defenseless elves and a baby reindeer out while forgetting this? Y'all, I'm starting to think Mrs. Claus is the villain of this story. She was going to be Santa this year, then probably remembered those brothers and sent the elves to die in her place.
Away, Dasher! Away!
Why do you guys keep using single reindeer to carry fully grown people? It normally takes a team of 8 to pull Santa in his sleigh. You're killing these poor creatures.
Snow miser who controls the northern part of the world trying to turn everything to icicles, and his nasty brother trying to keep the south so hot with nary a snowflake a year.
This either spits in the face of a very icy South Pole, or Mrs. Claus has unknowingly created a third option for voters who aren't quite on board with the flat earthers or the ball earthers.
Riding a vixen the wrong way on a one-way street.
Even if that wasn't meant to be a euphemism, it's certainly one now.
Take your socks off.
Take my socks off?
Just do as you're told.
Quentin Tarantinoing someone without explicit consent. Also, these red and black socks are magically brown on the inside, which shouldn't really make a difference because putting socks on a reindeer's head is a terrible disguise that only works because the writers willed it to.
Bark for the Lady Rover.
What the f***? How and why is this woman using a cat for a hand warmer when everyone will continually say that Southtown is hot year-round?
There are a whole bunch of children over there.
Well, let's talk to them.
Going to add that to the list of things 2 dudes named Jingle and Jangle should never say in public. Okay, the cat's no longer the scariest part of the movie. This child is. I'm more scared of that kid than I was of anything in the Conjuring films.
Besides, believing in Santa Claus is for little kids.
But you read about Christmas being canceled in the newspaper, right? All of those stories written by adults mention the holiday being canceled. The second newspaper, again run by adults, even had a freaking picture of Santa sick in bed. So I'm pretty sure believing in Santa Claus should be for everyone because he's clearly an observable phenomenon.
If I were you guys, I wouldn't waste my time worrying about Santa Claus. You got a bigger problem.
Iggy is a dick, and the cause of all the drama surrounding whether or not Vixen will live or die, all because being a lead-burying wise-ass was more important than alerting J&J to the problem while there was still time to intervene.
A very nice boy, Ignatius Thistlewhite.
He is not.
Nice name, too.
It is not.
Can you spare a moment?
Sure, my name's Ignatius Thistlewhite.
Why not just give him your social security number as well? Kids, don't talk to strangers, especially not ones creeping out from behind trees.
Well, why don't you bring him inside and talk?
You just heard this man sneeze loud enough that it caught your attention from inside the house. And you want to bring him inside to spend more time with your ill-named son? Man, pre-COVID really was a different time. This pre-sneezes on for all the some time. Iggy's father is now singing about how he believes in Santa Claus because he once awoke to Santa standing over his bed. And somehow this was a good thing.
Poor little Vixen, so frightened and sick in the dog pound.
TV movie wants me to believe that a person who spends all day with dogs can't tell the difference between one and a reindeer with antler condoms.
Then his friends must be real elves. And their dog. I'll bet that dog was a baby reindeer.
Writers expedite the plot by having this child detective all the pieces together based on his witnessing of one supernatural event.
Tell him the whole story.
Oh yes, because if there's one thing I know about mayors, it's that they're eager to make time for kids to tell them stories about Santa. I'm sure he'll get right in without any issues.
I'll spring your reindeer from the hoosegow.
Hoosegow? What the f*** is a hoosegow? Hang on. All right, let's see. Hoosegow. Oh, here it is. Hoosegow, a Western U.S. slang term meaning prison, comes from the Spanish juzgado, a word for court or tribunal. All right, that checks out. But I'm still sinning you for making me get the dictionary out. Do you know how heavy this dictionary is? It's really heavy.
I'll call all the mayors in the U.S. of A. We'll give Santa an official national holiday this year.
I doubt mayors have this kind of power, but more importantly, I doubt he has all their phone numbers. Also, the mayor is essentially holding a reindeer hostage in a grand scheme to induce climate change. This is at minimum an abuse of power. The mayor's now singing about how it's going to snow, but the bet he placed with the elves was based on his disbelief that they were in fact elves. So why is running out into the street singing about how it's going to snow the very first thing he does?
All will be white overnight.
Dude, I'm not sure things being white enough was ever the problem of this cartoon. This Chaplin cameo never pays off.
If he didn't get Vixen back to the North Pole fast, well, who knows what might happen to the littlest reindeer of the team.
Death. You're talking about dead reindeer. So please stop dashing, dancing, and prancing around the issue.
As far as they knew, Vixen was still in the pound.
Wait a second. Iggy saw Santa fly off towards the dog pound moments after he said Vixen got picked up by the dog catcher. So he should definitely know that Santa was on the case and that he might have solved this already. And despite what the production team wants you to think, no amount of camera panning is going to change that. Also, writers never tell us the story of when Jingle spent a few months touring with Flava Flav. You're now forcing poor Blitzen to pull 4 people and a sleigh all alone. Is there a rule that you can only check out one reindeer from the North Pole at a time? Or did the animators just not want to create multiple reindeer for these shots?
I'm Mr. White Christmas. I'm Mr. Snow. I'm Mr. Icicle.
Which is it? So far you've given us 3 different names, and Mrs. Claus called you Snow Miser. I'm beginning to think that you can't be trusted.
We'll have a blizzard.
Nice try, Mr. Icicle, or whatever your name is. But although Dairy Queen existed in 1974 when this film was released, its iconic Blizzard treats weren't introduced for another decade. So here's a sin for offering Santa a snack that doesn't even exist yet. Heat Miser just rhymed degrees with degrees. That's really all you need to know about that.
Get him out of here!
Well, technically he's not actually there. His face is just still on the Zoom call, which exists for some reason in 1974.
What does a flaming fool want this time?
This might have been more about the pun than being homophobic, but combined with the
Tutti Frutti snow cone
dig from his brother earlier, the references are quickly moving from veiled to cynical. How are you shooting elements at each other through a video screen? Is this actually a portal? Explain this dark magic, oh dark lords of the thermostat.
Mrs. C is through fooling around.
Admitting that 2/3 of this movie has been foreplay, and not the good kind.
Ta-ta!
2 minutes ago, Mrs. Claus said Mother Nature didn't like to be disturbed, and everyone was terrified of her. But when we cut to their conversation, she not only heard what they had to say, but brought out tea and fruit as well. Why were they so terrified of her? Was it to manufacture false tension? I think it was to manufacture false tension.
Mayors declare legal holiday for Santa.
But why? There's no law that said Santa had to do Christmas every year. What does this actually accomplish? Do they even have that authority? And how many mayors agreed to this? Do you know how many cities there are in the US alone? More than 108,000. You're telling me the mayor of Southtown had enough time in a single day to call every mayor and get them to push this policy? What if they didn't even believe in Santa? How did he convince him? Is this special over yet? Also, how long was Santa napping that Mrs. Claus and Jingle had enough time to wait for newspapers to find out about the holiday, write about it, and then send the paper to print? This article was featured in 2 different papers, and one of them ran it twice. And for some reason, the writers didn't think a menagerie breaking loose was more interesting than watching Santa cry about not being the center of attention.
And get this, day off for Santa.
Sure, a day off for Santa makes sense, and the thing about guns, no surprise there, but Cleveland leading the way? Fake news.
There is some goodwill in the hearts of all men at this time of year. This, especially this, proves it.
Oh, f*** off, Santa, and the culturally biased sled you rode in on. Japanese don't have anything to prove to you.
Fast as a hurricane, children hurled the happy message around the world.
Ah, yes, children, the fastest form of communication. Much faster than the public media outlets and governments that have already been well established in this story. Just saying, why didn't the mayor just call up all the mayors of the world?
They chartered buses and special trains to reach the pole by the 24th, was all their goal.
Expecting me to believe that all these little assholes were in this much of a rush to pledge fealty to the King of the North.
Why is everybody standing around? There's work to be done.
Because you told them all to stop working and put covers on everything for some reason. It's impossible to keep up with your wild mood swings.
But what about your gout?
When the f*** did he have gout? Why are they introducing third act ailments?
Now pile all those toys inside.
What toys, Santa? You shut down production some time ago. Why are you expecting that toys are just there to be piled inside? He should have little to no product to ship. So unless he's about to re-gift all the presents the children sent, this working is all the bullshit.
There's no time to waste. Tonight, we ride!
What the f, Santa? We spent this whole movie trying to get you a holiday. And then when the kids finally agree and send you gifts, you suddenly feel well enough to go Christmasing again? What was the point of this entire holiday special? To make Santa look like one of those people who loudly announce they're quitting Facebook and then you just lurk for about a week before jumping back in with your thoughts on gas prices as if the world would stop turning on its axis if people didn't know your opinion, Aunt Susan. Santa.
Somehow Santa Claus always comes.
Tagline for Mrs. Claus's new OnlyFans page somehow makes it into the script.
Significant shrinkage.
Whenever you look like you're not up to anything, you're up to something.
That doesn't make sense.
Snow miser who controls the northern part of the world trying to turn everything to icicles, and his nasty brother trying to keep the south so hot with nary a snowflake a year.
Egon called his dream the Song of Ice and Fire.
Like a Virgin's not about some sensitive girl who meets a nice fella. That's what True Blue's about. No, granted, no argument about that.
We're here on a special mission.
We're on a mission from God.
I had a couple Red Bulls. You ever had a Red Bull? I never had a Red Bull before, but I had a Red Bull last night. I really like Red Bull.
Well, why doesn't he wear a bathing suit and drive a sand buggy?
You are a crazy little man.